Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to another lesson on the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. The project books are the basis from the ISKCON Ministry of Education. My name is Krishna Prem Rupa Das. I'm serving here at ISKCON Zurich, and today we are very honored and pleased to have His Grace Anuttama Prabhu with us. Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Happy to be here. Happy to be here.
Of course, Anuttama Prabhu does not require so much introduction. Most devotees know him. He has been, he's a GBC member and serves as in the Minister of ISKCON Communication. Originally from Detroit, Michigan in USA, came in touch with the devotees in 72 as a student and joined in 75 and later on received initiation from Srila Prabhupada in Vrindavan actually, and then served first as a book distributor, Sankirtan leader, and opened also college preaching programs. Then was asked to become a temple president in Denver, where he served for 7 years, and later on took on the service as communication minister, first national and then international, globally, doing that service since almost 30 years. Has been a GBC member for more than 20 years, overseas in the USA, especially the eastern part of the United States, and also is the chairman of the Mayapur Executive Board. So a very busy person and a devotee who has taken up a lot of responsibility for Prabhupada's mission. So again, thank you for being with us today on this topic of books are the basis. So having introduced briefly, maybe it would be nice for our viewers to hear a bit how you came in touch, especially what was the first book that you received and how that book changed your life.
Yeah, I first, as you mentioned briefly, Prabhu, and thanks for having me on your program and this podcast. I'm really happy to be here. And of course, we know that Prabhupada's books literally are the foundation of our movement, and none of us have any scope to understand Krishna consciousness without Prabhupada's instructions in his books. So it's an honor to be here and talk about my small glimpse of appreciation for how important Prabhupada's books are. So the first time I met devotees, you mentioned briefly, was actually I was a high school student. I was a senior in high school, and I took a religion course. I had no interest at all in religion. I was quite an agnostic, but all my friends were in this class. So at that age group, your friends are more important than anything else in the whole world. So I signed up for this class with my friends and was really surprised how much religion just said, spoke to me. And I could see all of the kind of the allurements of the material world already were kind of exposed through reading different religious traditions. But what was most significant was they had the Hare Krishna devotees from the local temple in Detroit came. And so I remember being exposed to that. And I don't remember a whole lot other than the men, as expected, were pretty strange looking with their shaved heads. And the ladies at that time, maybe it was a fashion. I remember they all had big nose rings and like chains. Like, I think that was kind of the style. So that I remember. And I don't remember getting any books from them at that time. I don't think they gave books. And just in a sense to kind of understand my fallen nature, I do remember the one book I had that I got, I think as a college student later on, was the Krishna book. It's the first book that I got. Wow. And I think I really have to think that I have some kind of impersonal background, Mayavadi philosophy or something, because I read that book. I tried to. And, sometimes you meet devotees and they say, I read about Krishna and his pastimes in Vrindavan and with the gopis and the cows. And I just realized this is God and this is a wonderful thing. And, my fallen nature was just the opposite. I remember trying to read that book and I was, maybe coming out of a little Buddhist experience, this and that. I couldn't relate to it. I couldn't understand how is this God, which just further explains the importance of hearing from Prabhupada to put things in a proper perspective, from hearing from Prabhupada's books, and of course, hearing from other devotees who can explain and put things in proper perspective. So in one sense, my first experience wasn't a good one, but then again, it's interesting because Prabhupada, and I know Vaisheshika Prabhu and other, stalwart book distributors talk about, if they just take the book and they have it in their home, they're getting purified. So that Krishna book was in my house, in my apartment as a student for some time, and I know it was having some purificatory effect because otherwise I don't think I would have made it any further. And later, as far as if you were to ask, okay, so what book, early on had the most impact on you? I think it would be Science of Self-Realization. I that was given that book fairly early on. And just for me, it was so powerful. Of course, and it's a collection of Prabhupada's lectures and things he's spoken. It's not really something he sat down and recorded as he did the Bhagavatam and others. But I found it was such a wonderful introductory book for me because it touched on a lot of topics in very easy, digestible ways. So that was really kind of the first book that got me in the door.
Mm-hmm. And then once you became a brahmachari, and we mentioned you were a Sankirtan leader, so we're distributing books. How was the reading practice those days in the early days of ISKCON?
The practice was every spare moment read Prabhupada's books. I can remember in the morning we got up early. We had a wonderful Sankirtan leader originally, Srila Prabhu, who's now the BBT manager in Los Angeles, BBT trustee, and also temple president there. He was the Sankirtan. We'd get up early. The goal was to finish all your rounds before Mangal Artik. If you didn't get them done, it was kind of like, oh, I was having a bad day. I've got 2 rounds to go. And then when we spend that time, we would all meet with all the Sankirtan devotees and we read Bhagavad Gita for some time. And then we'd have Bhagavatam class. And I can remember studying verses, waiting for the deity curtains to open. You had like an extra 3 minutes. So you try to learn another verse while you were there. And then, of course, hearing during Prashadam, somebody would be reading from Krishna book or something else. Driving those days to the airport or other Sankirtan locations, we would sing the prayers of the 6 Goswamis and meditate upon them. During any kind of break time, if it was slow for a minute in the airport, nobody's coming down the hallway, you had the first canto Bhagavatam, you'd open that up and read a verse or two to get some extra inspiration. During lunchtime, finish quickly to read. So our whole experience was very much focused on, as Prabhupada said, don't just distribute the books, but read the books. That was an integral part. Because then you really felt like, I need to share this with somebody else. It's such a valuable knowledge that I'm being given. It's such a wonderful vision. So I have to share that with other people. So especially in those brahmachari years, it was read books, distribute books, read books, distribute books.
Wow. That's very inspiring to hear. I mean, we hear of these days, the early days, there was such a intense spirit of trying to please Srila Prabhupada and be really absorbed. That's powerful. Thank you. Of course, your service changed later on. You became a temple president. How was that, being a manager and at the same time trying to continue with the reading?
Well, I mean, and even I'll go back. I remember as a bhakta before I was doing book distribution. I mean, it was Nectar Devotion. Of course, Bhagavatam class was there in the morning. Bhagavad Gita class was there at night. Nectar of Instruction, Nectar of Devotion, Ishopanishad. So I was very much immersed in reading Prabhupada's books and studying Prabhupada's books. And then later as a temple president, I think one thing was really clear. And of course, reading Prabhupada's books alone and reading Prabhupada's books together, we can talk about the advantages of both of those, but I think definitely as a temple president, the need to help the devotees be remembering that without hearing the Bhagavatam regularly, our hearts can't be purified. And to do that, I always found especially to do that in association with devotees, whether it's a small class or whether it's the formal class, was essential. I've got a friend in Washington, D.C., actually my son's father-in-law, who he's such an avid reader and he's regularly, he finds something particularly interesting. So he'll take a snapshot and send it to me as a text. Just in the middle of the day, I get like a reminder of some wonderful thing that a godbrother's read from Prabhupada. And I think that kind of culture is so important for us to always be going back and remembering our foundation with Prabhupada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned remembering the foundation of being with Srila Prabhupada. I mean, you as a Prabhupada disciple, you have experienced Prabhupada and then afterwards the separation from him. How do you experience Srila Prabhupada being present in his books? That's we speak about this often, but for us it's interesting to hear from those who actually have seen Prabhupada and now how you experience him through the books.
Yeah, I think my experience is not unique, but kind of almost a transitional period, because I think you mentioned I came to Krishna consciousness in 1975 in Denver, Colorado. Prabhupada had just been there. I just missed him. And then I was stayed in the temple and somehow the temple president was very kind and allowed me to go to India in March of the following year. So that was 1976. So I was initiated in 76. So that was, and I saw Prabhupada. There was morning classes, and I was a junior. I was just a bhakta, and there was a lot of devotees there that year. The whole Radha Damodar book distribution party was there. So I was not, no morning walks, no special conversations, but I was initiated there by Prabhupada. And I mentioned that and then later took second initiation by mail in Denver. They did the Fire Yoga and all that Prabhupada had authorized. And I mentioned that in the context that, sometimes devotees talk about, we didn't have association with Prabhupada. You all had association with Prabhupada. But it's a fact that even the big leaders would spend a little time with Prabhupada. Maybe some of his secretaries were there for a year, 2 years, and then they'd go somewhere else. Even his secretaries weren't there with them for an extended period of time. They changed. So to say Prabhupada would go to New York, all the New York devotees would see him, and other people would come and visit for a few days, but then he'd be off somewhere else. So we actually today, especially, the next generation devotees in ISKCON and the generations after that, the fact is you have a better opportunity to associate with Prabhupada than we did, because all his lectures out there, all the videos are out there. You look at the work that Yadavar did, compiling all in Vishaka. Prabhu, did the two of them, putting together all of the video footage that's there, and we can read. There's so many biographies about Prabhupada, and we actually can get a better understanding. You can get a better understanding today of Prabhupada and the nuances of his teachings and how he applied things than they could in those early days. And I remember as a devotee, I think the fifth canto, perhaps, if I remember correctly, was the book that came out when I first joined. I may not have that right, but it wasn't like all the books were there. The books were still kind of like in process. So really, there's more opportunity to read Prabhupada's books and associate with Srila Prabhupada than there was in when I was there. So I think that's a really important thing for devotees to know, that it's, and we know, of course, Vani is more important than Vapu. So being able to read all of Prabhupada's books and hear about Prabhupada now literally can make as deep, in some ways, a deeper connection than those of us could when Prabhupada was physically present. It really is a spiritual experience. And same thing with reading books. I was thinking just before we started talking, I'm sure many people you're talking to have had the same experience. But oftentimes, there's something troubling me, or some question, or some doubt, or some pressure, or something like that. I'll pick up Bhagavad Gita and really say a prayer, Prabhupada, I'm confused on this. I need some instruction. I really need some insight on this. And then I'll just kind of open to a page. And I'm not a big guy on mysticism and all those kind of things. I'm kind of like a little mundane on most of those things. But on that, the vast majority of time, and in one sense, you could say, well, just because Prabhupada's teachings are so profound and so deep, they can touch on anything, any page. But oftentimes I have that experience. Okay, I really need some help now, Prabhupada, please guide me. And I'll open the page, and it's right there, the instruction that I needed to hear. It's a very, and again, I'm sure you have this exciting opportunity of speaking with so many devotees about their experience of Prabhupada and Prabhupada's books. So I'm sure you're hearing that from a lot of people. So I have some little glimmer of that too.
Now, Prabhu, you're a GPC member, and I think the GPC also felt the need that we need to encourage devotees to read more often, because we could understand that actually, many devotees have lost maybe somehow that spirit of picking up Prabhupada's books daily and really absorbing. What do you think? How would ISKCON be different if everyone actually would read daily, an hour or half an hour? Just if that spirit would be again more there. How could ISKCON change? What do you think?
Well, maybe I can answer that question in the way of like, why is it? What are the benefits that come from doing that? It's a similar thing, and I think that our movement is 50 plus 55 years now, which is not a long time. And, you can watch the interviews with some of the scholars that study these things, and they'll say that compared to other movements, big movements, Islam, Christianity. We're actually doing pretty good. Just the fact we've survived is kind of beats the odds for a lot of religious communities. And clearly we've done so. We've been able to survive and in many ways thrive because of Srila Prabhupada and his spiritual, his bhakti, his expertise, spiritual as well as secular. Prabhupada was like a phenomenal manager on top of everything else. And Prabhupada really gave the vision for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, which begins with Krishna's first instruction, you're not the body. And those, if we're honest, we can all say, I've been practicing for 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I'm still trying to realize that I'm not the body. I still think I'm whatever, a white guy from Detroit, or a black woman from South Africa, or a Jewish guy from Toronto, or, whatever it is, an Indian from Gujarat. Those are big pressures on us. And to try to form an international society, we have to keep at the center the vision that we're not Gujarati or American or Venezuelan or Australian, that our spiritual identity. And that's the thing, and oftentimes we talk about, when you read Prabhupada's books again and again and again, you're not the body. Again and again and again, the absolute truth is a person, again and again and again, sense gratification can't make you happy. So by reading Prabhupada's books, we're associating with a sadhu, with the most advanced, realized devotee of Lord Krishna, and most importantly, kind of embodying all of those, the founder Acharya Viscon. He's everybody. He may be my direct Diksha guru, but I think more importantly that, absolutely more important that, he's the founder Acharya for everybody. So in the future, okay, I have this Diksha guru, that Diksha guru, this Siksha guru, that Siksha guru. I read the books in German, I read the books in French, I read the books in Spanish or Hindi, whatever. But Prabhupada really is that. He is our founder Acharya. He's the example. He's the instructor. He's the visionary, and he's the one that pulls us all together. If we lose that connection, there's little hope for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Prabhupada is the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He had the vision. Of course, it's coming in parampara. It's not that he just woke up one day and decided he's a representative of God. There's a lot of people out there doing that. Prabhupada said over and over and over again, my only qualification is I'm following the footsteps of my spiritual master. Yet at the same time, he had the vision how to spread it around the world. He knew how to engage people from a variety of backgrounds. And I think if we don't connect with him, we lose this. And if we do connect with him, we gain that vision through regularly reading Prabhupada's books, every day reading Prabhupada's books, and keeping in mind, I'm not like a Swiss Hare Krishna or an American Hare Krishna or a Brahmachari Hare Krishna or a Grihastha Hare Krishna or a male Hare. I am part and parcel of Krishna. I'm a servant of Prabhupada, and I may be served in this place, you may be served in that place, but we have a shared identity. And Prabhupada's books is what keeps that shared identity first and foremost. And if we don't do that, and there's lots of people writing lots of wonderful books, and we should study those and learn from those as well. But Prabhupada is the one thing that really pulls us together. And I think it's clear that we need to hear from as many people as possible, but Prabhupada is always the gold standard. Prabhupada is always the gold standard, and everything should be seen in context of Prabhupada, what Prabhupada wrote, what Prabhupada did, and if we don't have that, this is not the age of love and trust. This is the age of quarrel and hypocrisy. And Prabhupada's vision, his mission is to spread Krishna consciousness a lot bigger than we've gotten so far. We've done a lot of things in 50 years, but like I'm visiting Chicago right now, there's like a couple temples in the town of, 10 million people. That's not enough. That doesn't cut it. So we've got a lot of work to do. And Prabhupada's the one more than anyone who mobilizes, inspires all of us. And that comes to hearing from him. We have to hear from him.
Prabhu, you mentioned how Prabhupada had such a big vision, that certainly there's still plenty of work to be done. Now, as a global minister for communication, think that's also the motto of communication, is creating a Sankirtan-friendly world, right?
Yeah, yeah, we say that. Yes.
Yes, like basically it's a way to prepare the field so that ISKCON and the preachers of ISKCON are received much better and be respected. Maybe it would be nice to talk a little bit about your service, and also in connection with the importance of studying Prabhupada's books. How did understanding Prabhupada's teachings and reading Prabhupada's books help you in your service as a communication minister, in interacting with so many different people from different faiths? And
yeah, well, I'll mention two things, and I'm thinking of in the Bhagavatam, the first canto, where it glorifies the Bhagavatam and the importance of hearing regularly from the Bhagavatam and purification by the Bhagavatam. And in that one famous purport, Prabhupada talks about there's the book Bhagavat and there's the person Bhagavat, and how each of them has potency, and how the book Bhagavat really is a history of the devotee Bhagavats, and the devotee Bhagavat lives only in terms of the book Bhagavat. So they really are one in that sense. And so I think another thing I like to mention is reading Prabhupada's books, absolutely essential for us. And I think almost as essential as that, I would put it right up near the top, is reading about Prabhupada, reading about how, because I think, there's, as we mentioned earlier, there's jnana and there's vijnana. So an example in how this affects my service too, we'll get around to that. Let's say we read in Bhagavad Gita, okay, of all the principles of knowledge, humility is the most important. And Prabhupada defines that in his purport. But Prabhupada doesn't in the book say, by the way, here's how I applied it. He could have written his books like that, okay, humility. And by the way, yesterday I was speaking with so-and-so, and this is how I applied it. We don't get that commentary. We get that commentary with the devotees who are with Prabhupada and talk about, oh my gosh, I was shocked to see how humble Prabhupada was in this specific situation. So I think that's also really important too. And for me, as a Prabhupada Nuga, as we all are, I really relish hearing from other devotees who were with him, as you talked earlier. The few people had those opportunities. And I'll just give an example. The last year with COVID, lockdown, and all that, I really spent a lot of time reading some biographies. I reread the Lilamrita the whole way through twice, and I really realized that every paragraph, there's some little nugget about how Prabhupada did something in a particular circumstance, which leads me back to Prabhupada's books. And, I remember reading, we're supposed to do this. Now I see what he meant by that, by how he put it in practice. And I think a couple examples come to mind. When Prabhupada was in New York City, 26 Second Avenue, they just started the first temple. And it describes that the landlord, I think his name was Chudy. I'm not sure that's how you pronounce it right. He was an immigrant guy, and he bought this. Prabhupada sometimes would criticize him in class as an example of a materialistic person, took his life savings and bought this old rundown building. Now he's going to spend all his time and money keeping it running. So Prabhupada would speak like that, a little bit philosophically, but at the same time, Prabhupada taught the disciples, he said, you should be very respectful to him. He's your elder and he's our landlord, and we need to have a good relationship with him. And then it describes, and again, I probably read Lilamrita 6 times, and it took me the 7th time before this caught my attention. Prabhupada, Shaktiveshavatar, founder Charya, pure devotee of Srila Prabhupada, of Krishna, Lord Chaitanya, who had just come from Vrindavan a few months before, like that elevated spiritual realm. He helped Mr. Chudy take out the neighbor's trash. He helped Mr. Chudy take out the neighbor's trash. And for those that may listen to this that are younger, you go back in that period of time, it wasn't like everybody had these big fancy plastic bags you buy now in the grocery stores or the drugstores, and you tie up your trash. They were like old metal cans, and taking out the trash was not a very clean thing to do. And of course, doesn't get into details, but just how could these are materialistic people, non-devotee neighbors. So just, for me, reading Prabhupada's books and then asking ourselves, well, how do I apply that? What does it practically mean? Because we hear in one place, don't associate with non-devotees. Devotees have to be clean. Devotees shouldn't touch unclean things. In the Vedic standard, you got to run and jump in the Ganga and take a bath if you see the face of a materialistic person. We can get really confused and act in ways that aren't so mature. And I think a lot of that maturity comes through. We hear from Prabhupada and we see how to Prabhupada apply that instruction. And there's so many examples. Another one, same period, Prabhupada staying with the Agarwals in Butler, Pennsylvania. And it's described how one evening he came back a little early. And Mrs. Agarwal, Sally Agarwal, said, "Oh, Swamiji, I apologize. I was, you're a little early, or dinner was late. I haven't cleaned up yet. It must be disturbing to you." And these people are not vegetarians. Now, I may think, you may think, someone else may think, oh, perfect opportunity to tell her, well, yeah, it's disgusting what's in your sink. And, by the way, you're going to go to hell for a long time because you're not a vegetarian. Prabhupada's response was, no, think nothing of it. That's what Prabhupada said to her. No, think nothing of it. So, it makes us think, well, why would Prabhupada, of all the things Prabhupada could have said and done, she was his hostess. They had sponsored him. He was being gracious. And we see, okay, another example, Prabhupada's a sannyasi. We have all seen those pictures. Prabhupada playing with that little kid, Bridge, I think was his name, And when he took his first steps, and Sally Agarwal talks about they had such a wonderful time together. Or, you flash forward, Prabhupada's a sannyasi, marrying couples, participate. I mean, that's like from a Brahminical, Vedic, Varnashram point of view, that is totally taboo. How can a sannyasi take part in a wedding ceremony? Because Prabhupada's vision was every soul has a connection with Krishna. Everyone is a devotee of Krishna. And he went to these crazy Western countries, and he went back to India, which was crazy in its own way, because he had this realization and his spiritual conviction. He just saw the truth. Everybody's connected to Krishna. So how he applied those teachings, I think, are also really important for us. So I would just, my small voice, encourage devotees, read Prabhupada's books, and also find some time to read about how Prabhupada personally, the book Bhagavat and the devotee Bhagavat. Those are both important, or else sometimes we can easily misinterpret and misapply what Prabhupada's, the mood of his mission.
I think that's a very profound statement, that reminding us that there is the book Grantha, but there's the Bhakta Bhagavat, and basically you already gave a hint how we can learn to apply by actually observing, to learn from the example of the pure devotee, and we can do that by just hearing and reading about Prabhupada also. Thank you. Yeah.
I just read Giri Maharaj's new book about, I think he called it, "I'll Build You a Temple," that quote from Prabhupada. And something that just struck me the other day about Prabhupada was putting so much emphasis on making friends, and some of them became devotees with the neighbors. And most of us think, well, neighbors, who cares about the neighbors? They just walk outside. But Prabhupada really put an emphasis on the neighbors. And also Prabhupada was really pushing the devotees. And they're still living on practically a jungle. They used machetes to chop it down, but there was no temple there. It was just a shack, and they were still fighting for the land. But Prabhupada was pushing for them to have classes for the kids. And that was a big priority, that they classes and fun. And there's some memories from some of the now adults about how they really appreciated that. Some of the senior most devotees, maybe some were sannyasis, I can't remember, but the senior most devotees were spending time every week, maybe every day, reaching out to these little, Indian kids that lived in the tenement houses nearby. Because Prabhupada said that was an emphasis. So again, Prabhupada talks about Krishna conscious education and the importance of that. And yet when I hear, well, how did he apply that? How did he make it important at very, very early days? It enhances my appreciation for his instruction in his books. And it makes me want to go deeper in the reading of the books, philosophically and from the tradition. What's the foundation for that, to better understand how he applied it? So I want to know the foundation, then I want to know how he applied it, which makes me want to know the foundation more.
So it really brings us deeper into Prabhupada's personality. And it seems you get a lot of inspiration from Prabhupada's example also for your service in the communication field. You're also doing a lot of interfaith, like meeting with different religious people. I think you have been doing a Vaishnava Christian dialogue for how many years?
Almost 25 years, every year for 2 days.
25 years.
That's in Washington with some pretty high people.
Yeah.
You know, priests and some bishops and scholars, you know, professors from the Catholic University. And then we started in India also. There's been a break because of COVID, but we did it online once or twice also, but also big people, you know, heads of seminaries. And there we had an archbishop participate a couple times. So yeah, some good people.
How would you say that Srila Prabhupada's books has an influence on this kind of service that you're doing? Because, I mean, these priests and bishops, they will cite the Bible, and I guess you will cite the Bhagavad Gita. Would you like to share something on that? Yeah,
one thing that comes to my mind is those interactions make me want to think deeper and study deeper Prabhupada's books. And I'll give one example. Say, we know, you know, in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada, right near the conclusion of his introduction, he says, so let there be one mantra, let there be one book, like that. And it's kind of
could be misunderstood, right?
Well, I mean, it's I wouldn't say misunderstood. I would say it could be taken out of context and misapplied. If you just take that, if you just take that, but then, you know, you go to the 4th chapter, and Prabhupada says that it's not a fact that Krishna only appears on Indian soil. He can appear anytime and anywhere he wants, you know, but the mission is the same. And then he goes on to talk about in mathematics, 2 plus, I think he says 2 plus 2 is 4, doesn't matter. So in the same way, all the different, you know, traditions, they're trying to bring people. So meeting with people from a different religious tradition, it does a lot of things, you know, because it makes you kind of wrestle. How deep is my own conviction? In other words, you know, these are people that don't worship Tulsi Devi every day. They don't japa every day, but they still seem to be pretty deep in their spiritual commitment. You know, within the Christians are you know, Prabhupada said they're like Vaishnavism. They're also trying to awaken love of God. So they're not doing exactly what I'm doing. So how did they get there if they're not doing exactly what I'm doing? And then it makes me think, so what are the principles behind what I'm doing? Is it just that I do certain things, you know, like dry? Or is it, you know, like Prabhupada talks about in the teachings of Queen Kunti, there's such potency in the chanting of the holy name that just, you know, chanted once, you're liberated. But Prabhupada says, well, there's a quality in that purport. He says there's a quality to such chanting. So in the same way, you know, one of the benefits I found from interacting with people from another tradition, it makes me really look and see what's the quality of my own practice. You know, is it just that I do this, you know, the same rituals that everybody else does? There's tremendous benefit in following, you know, regulated programs. That's the core of our life. But Prabhupada said, you know, are you entering into the spirit of that thing? So that's one benefit. And also it helps us to, you know, they ask questions. Why do you do this? Why do you do that? Sometimes it's got to be, oh, that's a good question. We've got to research that. I'm not sure why we do that. Let me go back and study a little more carefully and get back to you on that. Yeah. I mean, just a little bit more briefly on that interfaith. Some of it, I've done some interfaith work that I found just a total waste of time. There's no depth to it. It's just kind of superficial. Maybe there's some benefit, but not much. But personally, what I like is dealing with people that are really committed to their tradition and are scholarly and, you know, well-founded in understanding it. And when you meet people like that, very often it's very open, honest, candid conversation. Here's our beliefs. Here's the questions that are left that we struggle with, maybe within our tradition. Here's the historical problems we faced. And oftentimes Vaishnavas and Christians, we face some of the same sociological kind of issues. These are some of the administrative issues, you know. Like, I know Rabindranath Srila Prabhu, who's been a member of this dialogue almost since the beginning, the one with the Christian group in particular. We do another one with Muslims also. But would often introduce himself saying, I thought I was dedicating my life to, kind of cloistered spiritual practice, but in a humorous way, he'd say, but I ended up becoming a religious bureaucrat, which they all chuckle, because most of them, they started out with theological studies or this or that, but they were called into different type of service. So it deepens. And then you go back and you look at our own acharyas and the things like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, what he's written about open-mindedness in reference to people of other spiritual traditions. And it makes you really feel like, okay, this really isn't, it's not so cheap. Krishna really wants to see my heart changing. And it's not just like we all, we've all met Christians. It's like, I'm a Christian, my work's done. Well, that's not what I heard. That's not what these Christians would say. Or whatever, I'm a Jew, I'm a Muslim, I'm a this, I'm that, or I'm a Hare Krishna, I go to the temple, my work's done. Or I got initiated, my work's done. No, initiated, now my work starts. So I think sometimes interfaith, it reminds us of the importance of that. And again, it forces us to go deeper. And interesting to go back and see, what did Prabhupada do with his exchanges? And we tend to hear about the ones where he blasted the French cardinal, who was kind of a nonsense. We learned later, Prabhupada seemed to see right through him. But we don't often hear about the times when Prabhupada met with the priests in Australia and said, Jesus is our guru. So we got to keep why did he blast this, have an argument with this person? And why was he so congenial with these? What's the principle behind that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I personally also have some experience in interfaith dialogues, and sometimes it's quite impressive to see how people receive the knowledge that we share. Like, I remember once I had a dialogue with a 85 years old Sufi master, and I was just a young brahmachari. So what is my qualification to talk to him? But repeating Srila Prabhupada's teachings, it was a nice dialogue. Do you have some experiences how other people kind of appreciate Prabhupada's wisdom in these kind of dialogues?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just an overall, if I can just kind of speak overall appreciation for the tradition. If we want to say, hey, did they have appreciation of Prabhupada's books? I mean, every single one of Prabhupada's books, there's, 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 pages of appreciation by scholars saying, this is, this is the best edition on the Gita and Bhakti. Or Prabhupada, Swami Bhaktivedanta speaks with a unique voice. Or, so many wonderful things that are there. So we know scholars and people from other religious traditions who are scholarly that deeply appreciate Prabhupada's contributions and deeply appreciate his effort to do the translations and his commentaries, his purports, and have them translated in different languages. They really see this as a phenomenal contribution to religious awareness around the world, to awareness of Vaishnava tradition, and just even from an academic point of view, is phenomenal what Prabhupada had achieved. Now, from a little bit like a theological, I remember one dialogue, we had a Christian Vaishnava dialogue in India, and there was this one Protestant participant there who was also a professor, very scholarly person. And halfway through the dialogue, we're talking about what we learned from Prabhupada and what our tradition, and I forget the actual topic. It might have been something like, love of God or something really broad like that. But at one point, this one Christian scholar, he said, I'm starting to understand. He said, we Christians, we talk a lot about what God's done for us. And those of us that interact with Christians, we know they're very focused, God gave his only begotten son, right? That's the quote we hear a lot. And he died to try to save us and all that. So he said, we have a lot of realization about what God's done for us. He said, you Vaishnavas, he said, we hear a lot about how God loves us. That's our Christian focus. You Vaishnavas, you talk about how to love God. The whole room just kind of was like, wow, wow. Just see, how we can learn from each other and appreciate from each other. And, some very, very deep exchanges. And they want to base this on Shastra. You know, in some of the Christian dialogues, there's a couple people in the U.S. dialogue that are always saying, "Hey, text. We want to read your text." So sometimes devotees, you know, whatever the topic may be, you know, whatever spirit in the world, affirmation, renunciation. Those are concepts that are within our two traditions. You know, we certainly have the concept of renunciation, but through bhakti, it's all about engaging the world. They have similar things. You know, Jesus said, honor your father and mother, but then other places he said, if you got to go back and bury your father, you're not worthy to come with me. You're too attached. So, you know, talking about those, but say, where's the text? So reading something from Chaitanya Charitamrita, from the Gita, from the Bhagavatam. So we read our text, they read our text, we read their text, some of the things, some of the saints in their tradition. And it's really inspiring because you see there's a lot, you know, Krishna's, there's nothing in our scripture that says, you know, Paramatma manifests the day you move into the Hare Krishna Brahmachari ashram. I've never read that in Prabhupada's books. From what I understand, Paramatma was always there and he's always leading people. So to meet with people and see how Paramatma, how Krishna is also leading people in other traditions and learning from them and going into our own text and comparing it, inspiring them to study our text is wonderful.
Thanks so much for sharing all of that. I think it's very encouraging. As you mentioned, like interacting with different faiths to also deepen our own understanding and practice. Would you like to share some closing words, some final advice, how we can deepen our enthusiasm for reading Srila Prabhupada's books, and as you emphasized in this conversation, also to apply it in our daily lives?
Yeah, I just think we need to, our movement's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And right now, whatever, there's 100 Diksha gurus, who knows how many Siksha gurus, there's 600 temples, thousands of Bhakti Vrikshas. And we associate, through the association of devotees, we get inspired. But every one of us, whether we're second generation, third generation, in the future, 10th generation, or whether direct Prabhupada disciples, whether we had a lot of association with Prabhupada or physically none, Prabhupada is the root for us. Of course, the parampara is there, understood. But Prabhupada is the one that brought it and made it universal in terms of how to express it to people. And he did so through what's the beautiful display behind you, through, first and foremost, through his books. You know, we all know the references, you know, Prabhupada said, I may die at any time, but, you know, my books, everything I need to say to you is on your books. So I think in the beginning, maybe we come to Krishna consciousness and, you know, somebody inspires us, the temple president's great, or so-and-so gives a nice class, or so-and-so Mataji is really compassionate to us and gives us a lot of sweet balls or whatever. That's good to get us in the door. But then, and then we may say, you know, so-and-so is really inspiring. And maybe there's a few sannyasis, a few gurus that travel through and they preach really nicely. We connect with them, or somebody gives us their books, and that's all wonderful. And yet we have to understand, where is that GBC member's Shakti coming from? Where is that guru's awareness coming from? Where is that temple president's inspiration coming from? It all comes from Prabhupada, ultimately Krishna, of course. But it comes, Prabhupada's the one that made it real for the whole movement. Prabhupada's the one that said, look, every town and village means every town and village, right? Prabhupada's the one that says, when Narada Muni says it doesn't matter, you know, what your birth is, and gives himself an example of being born, you know, as the son of a maidservant, etc. Prabhupada's the one that made that real. So if we begin to understand, this is not just a local temple that seems cool because they're into bhakti, or I'm comfortable with because they do some of the things my grandmother did back in Bengal. Okay, that gets us in the door. But once we're in the door, the sense of like, wow, this is a movement, you know, this is a community, this is an organization, this is a culture that really has a formula and has the drive to actually fix a lot of things that are wrong with this world and give us hope for the next. And when we start to see that, then we need to see, I need to go really deep with the founder. I need to go deep with the tradition. Not just, you know, Anuttama Das wrote a couple articles in ISKCON News about this or that. Great. And maybe you like Anuttama Das. Maybe you don't like Anuttama Das. I hope you like me. I hope that you like whatever I wrote in ISKCON News, or maybe a book I write about this or that. But I, or all of us, I'm just using myself as an example, we are just conduits, hopefully a little transparent, of Prabhupada. And people have to connect with Prabhupada. And we will not stay an international movement. We will not stay an international movement united if Prabhupada's not there in the center. And if the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth generation don't realize, okay, well, Anuttama maybe or whatever, Krishna Prema Rupa inspired somebody, that's great. We're glad to have assisted you in that way. Now read Prabhupada's books. Now connect with Prabhupada's books. And as I mentioned, in addition to reading Prabhupada's books, read the books about Prabhupada by the people who were there with him and see how he applied things. Because, you know, sometimes it's so easy to take something out of context. Bhagavad Gita introduction, only one book, only one mantra. And then we walk out the next day and say, your book's bogus, your book's nonsense. And that's what Prabhupada said. You go back and see how did Prabhupada apply that. What did Prabhupada say in other parts of his books? Another reason we have to study carefully. You read this purport, Prabhupada's talking about a specific historical context, where he's talking about from a certain angle of view, and he'll mention one or two sentences about a particular topic. You go back another canto or the CC or some other very different perspective. And it's not that Prabhupada's contradicting himself at all, but he's unpacking different things, which leads us that what are the principles behind that? What's the meaning behind that? Not that I just take something superficially. What's Prabhupada mean by that? How did Prabhupada apply it? And if we really go deep in that, then we realize, wow, black, white, male, female, Indian, South America, North America, we're all in this together. We are an international society. And Prabhupada's given his mercy to all of us. And we really have something wonderful to share. And we all, despite our limitations, we can be a wonderful little piece of like the best thing in the world for me and for you and for everybody. And that's pretty exciting to have that opportunity. And we will remember that if we connect with Prabhupada's books. And if we don't connect with Prabhupada's books, there's a tendency to think, oh, so-and-so, she's too critical. Oh, so-and-so, he's too this. Oh, I don't like this one. I don't like that one. I don't want to go to the temple anymore because, you know, this problem, that problem. But there's problems everywhere. But when we read Prabhupada's books, we should get inspired with the philosophy. But then equally as important, how am I going to apply it in my life? That's so critical. So read Prabhupada's books and apply what we read.
Thanks so much, Prabhu. That's such a powerful message that you shared with us today. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity to meditate on Srila Prabhupada and his wonderful gifts. I'll just end with this. You know, Prabhupada writes, I think in the first canto of the Bhagavatam, he uses this expression. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm close. We're so grateful to Narada Muni, who has appeared on the pages of the Bhagavatam. In the same way, we should feel we're so grateful to Prabhupada. Of course, and, you know, who else? Vyasadeva is there, Prahlad Maharaj is there, you know, Vidura is there, you know, there's so many. So also grateful to Prabhupada, who has so kindly appeared in the pages of his purports and his translations.
Thank you again for taking your time and enlightening us with this wonderful inspiration. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada's books ki jai.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama.